This is probably the first time you're hearing about this news, so I urge you to stay until the end before talking about it with your friends, because every detail matters. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Jedha was burning with energy that night, not from the heat, but from something intangible, something almost supernatural. The atmosphere wasn't just charged, it was vibrating, trembling under the weight of expectation. Everyone present could feel it clawing at the edges of reality, like the track itself was trying to warn them. Cameras panned lazily, unaware of the storm brewing. Commentators kept their voices steady, drivers focused on numbers and lines, but deep beneath the usual rhythm of a Friday session, something darker pulsed. This wasn't going to be a normal evening. Fate had written a different script, one soaked in carbon fiber, fury, and uncontainable adrenaline. What began as a calm data-gathering free practice too rapidly descended into absolute, uncontrollable madness. Not because of rain, not because of red flags or engine failures. No, this was something else, a direct collision between pride and pressure, written in speed and sealed in silence. Lewis Hamilton was in the middle of a complex long-run program. Every corner he drove was layered with adjustments, torque delivery, rear locking, hybrid energy cycling. The car was no longer just a machine, it was an instrument, and he was tuning it with every finger twitch. In his ears, Peter Bonington's voice fed him a steady stream of instructions, numbers, warnings, adjustments, every second packed with purpose. Lewis was methodical, clinical, dissecting the circuit like a surgeon. He was off the throttle, weaving slightly to stabilize surface temps. He believed the track was his alone for the moment. But a storm was coming. Behind him, Charles Leclerc was barreling towards Sector 2 with the rage of a caged animal set loose. His last 3 laps had been disasters, blocked, boxed in, thrown off by traffic and chaos. He was done playing nice. The SF-24 screamed in agony as he squeezed every ounce of performance out of it. The throttle was pinned, the chassis vibrating at the edge of structural integrity. He was flying blind into destiny. His engineer gave him a brief update, Hamilton ahead, slow, but Charles didn't register it as a message. He took it as a provocation. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. His mind was boiling. His vision narrowed. The next lap was going to be his. No matter what. No matter who was in the way. As he rocketed into turn 18, the black shape of Hamilton's Mercedes came into view. Not moving off. Still weaving. Still on the racing line. In that microsecond, Charles made a decision he couldn't take back. He wasn't lifting. He wasn't waiting. He was going through. But Lewis moved. Slightly. Unintentionally. Yet fatally. The resulting collision was not merely a crash. It was a collision of dimensions, a cataclysmic fusion of speed and miscalculation. Leclerc's front left exploded into Hamilton's rear quarter like a thunderclap. The Ferrari's nose instantly dipped, the rear lifted, the whole car twisted mid-air, turning into a flying sculpture of destruction. The floor panels detached. The rear wing shattered. The monocoque slapped the asphalt like a meteor crashing to Earth. The impact was so violent, marshals near turn 21 instinctively ducked behind barriers. Sparks sprayed like fire from a dragon's throat. The Tech Pro barrier flexed and screamed. Leclerc's car crumpled violently, metal folding like paper under monstrous G-forces. Hamilton's W15 didn't fare better. It spun uncontrollably, one side scraping against the wall before the car ricocheted into the opposite barrier. When it came to a rest, it looked like it had been through an explosion, rear axle twisted, underfloor exposed, suspension arms flailing in the air like broken limbs. The session was halted instantly, but the sound of the crash still echoed over the quiet. No one moved. No one spoke. Teams stared at monitors, frozen. The radio channels went silent. Mechanics who'd built those cars by hand stood in horror. A sport defined by speed had suddenly met its most violent reminder of fragility. And then movement. Hamilton climbed out first. Slowly. Visibly stunned. His helmet was tilted, posture stiff, but he was on his feet. He turned, looked at his wreck, shook his head once, and walked toward the wall without saying a word. A camera caught his eyes, wide, unblinking, overwhelmed by disbelief. Leclerc exited moments later, limping, furious. He didn't remove his helmet. He didn't check on the car. He didn't acknowledge Lewis. He ripped off his gloves and hurled them toward the barrier. His body language screamed one thing: betrayal. The media response was instant and incendiary. Every news outlet had a headline within minutes. Social media turned into a battlefield. Thousands of replays, every angle, every piece of slow-motion analysis. People zoomed in on telemetry traces, speculated over throttle percentages, argued about whose fault it was, created conspiracy threads, and declared wars between fanbases that had barely coexisted before. Mercedes released a cautious statement. Ferrari refused to comment. Sky F1 anchors looked shell-shocked, their scripts thrown aside. Damon Hill called it a bomb disguised as a practice session. Rosberg muttered that it reminded him of the nastiest days between him and Lewis. Brundle said nothing for 30 seconds. Just silence. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Inside the steward's room, the investigation began immediately. Engineers brought in data logs, communication timelines, throttle overlays. Race directors huddled. Pressure mounted. Every word mattered. Every frame of video dissected like a crime scene. And still, the paddock wasn't over it. The collision had rattled everyone. It wasn't just two cars hitting. It was two worlds colliding. Two titans with history, tension, and unresolved fury smashing into each other in the most brutal of ways. People will talk about that moment for decades. It wasn't just high-speed contact. It was a spark that lit up the entire foundation of modern Formula One. Yellow lights blinked for a heartbeat before morphing into a full-blown red flag situation. But this wasn't a routine race stoppage. This was a full-scale catastrophe. The noise was monstrous, metal screeching and glass exploding in a burst of chaos. It sounded like the earth itself had cracked open. What had been a high-speed chess match moments earlier was now a smoking graveyard of carbon fiber and steel. Flames licked the edges of the shattered monocoques. The smell of burning rubber, fuel, and panic filled the air. Crowds, once electric with excitement, fell under a blanket of horrified silence. People didn't scream, they stared frozen, hands over mouths, unable to process the brutality they had just witnessed. Flags waved frantically. Officials barked instructions. Team radios went silent. This wasn't sport. It was trauma happening in real time. In the wreckage, neither car showed life. The shells of two titans sat still, surrounded by twisted wrecks that had once been weapons of precision. Smoke coiled upward in thick, angry spirals. Sparks still flickered around the crushed suspensions. For agonizing seconds, time stood still. And then, one of the cockpits shifted. Slowly. Then violently. Hamilton's helmet tilted. Then he tore himself free. There was no elegance, no calm. He kicked the shattered steering wheel aside and forced his body upward with pure survival instinct. His right boot was burned through, the fireproof layer underneath singed and black. His gloves were dripping with sweat and torn so badly that his knuckles were visible through the fabric. Blood oozed from a nasty cut near his thumb. His chest heaved with effort, his breathing ragged and broken. As he climbed out, part of the side pod collapsed under his weight. He stumbled forward, nearly falling, barely catching himself against a smoking piece of bodywork. His visor was smeared with grime. His posture said everything: pain, rage, disbelief. He looked like he had been through war. A few seconds later, the other car stirred. Leclerc was moving, barely. His body emerged slower, more unstable. His left arm hung limp, obviously injured. He braced himself against the crumpled halo, then dragged one leg over the side, wincing with every movement. His visor had cracked on the inside, splintered from the sheer force of the impact. When he removed his helmet, you could see a red line stretching across his forehead, and blood had pooled around his elbow, trickling freely down to his gloves. His shoulder was contorted unnaturally. But still, he stood. And he walked. And as he staggered toward the marshals, Hamilton turned. His eyes locked onto Leclerc, and in that instant, history exploded. This wasn't about strategy. This wasn't about overtaking. This was about vendettas, years in the making. You almost killed us both. Hamilton bellowed, voice hoarse and sharp as a blade. Leclerc wheeled around, eyes blazing. You slammed the door on me. What did you expect would happen? The air around them cracked with tension. Officials surrounded them, trying to de-escalate, but it was useless. They were no longer drivers. They were warriors, stripped of decorum, roaring with fury. Hamilton stepped forward again, chest puffed. Every single time, you dive in like you're immortal. Leclerc growled back, fists clenched. And every single time, you act like the world owes you the corner. And then, detonation. Leclerc shoved Hamilton. Hard. With enough force to send the 7-time world champion staggering backward. It wasn't calculated. It was instinct. It was rage igniting in its purest form. Gasps erupted from the grandstands. Officials yelled. The marshals hesitated. Nobody knew what would happen next. But Hamilton didn't retreat. He came forward, seething, adrenaline tearing through his veins. He responded with a violent shoulder check that sent Leclerc spinning sideways. But it was what happened next that truly crossed the line from chaos into horror. Leclerc's foot hit a streak of leaked coolant. His balance disappeared in an instant. He crashed down backwards, directly onto a shattered rear wing segment. A jagged edge pierced his suit like paper. A deep wound tore across his back, splitting the fabric and slicing into skin. Blood sprayed outward as he let out a scream so loud, so guttural, it silenced the track again. Medics dove in. FIA officers screamed for medical extraction. Team members from both garages abandoned their pit walls to rush toward the scene. Cameras zoomed in, catching every detail. Hamilton standing frozen, wide-eyed, knuckles still clenched. Leclerc writhing, spasming, blood soaking into the asphalt beneath him. This was beyond racing. Fans wept. Children clutched their fathers. On social media, every app crashed from the flood of posts. The incident wasn't just viral, it was volcanic. F1 has changed forever, read one comment. This is madness, said another. But none of it captured the full weight of what had just happened. What occurred wasn't part of the championship battle. It wasn't a fight for position. It wasn't even about speed anymore. It was personal destruction. A meltdown of discipline. Two men whose hatred had festered beneath the surface, finally letting the monster out. And it came with a price, blood, injury, and the kind of scar that doesn't heal with time or apology. There would be penalties. There would be investigations. But none of that mattered in that moment. What mattered was that Formula One had witnessed its most brutal, most human, most unforgettable clash in living memory. And nothing would ever be the same. Within seconds of the horrifying impact, the entire F1 universe descended into stunned paralysis. Charles Leclerc lay twisted beside the crumpled remains of his Ferrari, wincing as marshals and medics surrounded him. His helmet was still on, but you could see it in his eyes: pain, fury, and disbelief. His racing suit was torn down the shoulder, revealing blood smearing his collarbone, a brutal reminder of how quickly this sport can flirt with disaster. Just meters away, Lewis Hamilton was helped out of his wrecked Mercedes by two marshals. He was limping heavily, one hand pressed to his ribs, the other wiping blood from a nasty gash slicing just above his eye. Despite the damage, his jaw was clenched with intensity. There was no panic in his face, only controlled rage. He pulled away from the support crew, stood straight, and walked toward the medical car without a single glance back at the crash site. The pit lane had turned into a graveyard. Normally a frenzy of mechanics, engineers, and controlled chaos, now it was a silent corridor of disbelief. Radios buzzed with static. Team members stared at screens that kept playing replays of the crash from every conceivable angle. No one spoke. No one moved. It was as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the paddock. Inside the Ferrari garage, panic shifted to paperwork. Lawyers were summoned, PR teams mobilized, and the FIA was flooded with a barrage of footage from every onboard camera available. The team's official report didn't mince words. Hamilton demonstrated a catastrophic lack of situational awareness, endangering the life of a fellow competitor. It was a declaration of war. Mercedes countered with the sharpness of a dagger. A flood of technical data was rushed to the stewards, complete with 3D visualizations, brake traces, and high-resolution heat maps. Their defense was ferocious. Leclerc ignored every safety principle and chose a suicide move into a blind spot. They didn't just deny responsibility, they flipped the narrative entirely. The media room turned hostile. Tension crackled like a live wire. Cameras rolled, but reporters were too stunned to speak. Then Toto Wolff walked in, stone-faced, voice like cold steel. This isn't a racing accident. This is a total failure of judgment. And it's not the first time. He didn't say Leclerc's name, but he didn't have to. Minutes later, Fred Vasseur stormed in like a man possessed. He slammed his water bottle on the table so hard it cracked. If the stewards don't act now, they're endorsing recklessness. This isn't competition, this is carnage. His voice shook with fury, but his words were precise, surgical. He wasn't there to argue. He was there to demand blood. Meanwhile, at the medical center, the scene was no less dramatic. Leclerc had suffered a partial shoulder separation, severe ligament damage, and a gash so deep doctors were concerned about nerve exposure. He was put on morphine immediately. Before they took him for scans, he reportedly muttered, "He knew where I was. He chose to hit me." Hamilton, bruised and banged up, refused a stretcher. His ribs were badly battered, and he needed 4 stitches for the eyebrow wound. But as soon as he was cleared, he asked for the onboard footage. According to a team insider, he watched the clip at least 10 times in complete silence before finally speaking. He tried to shut the door on history. The story didn't stop with the wreckage. It had roots. Deep ones. Paddock insiders have long whispered about a bitter undercurrent between the two stars. Some trace it back to private tensions during Hamilton's rumored approach to Ferrari last year. Leclerc was allegedly furious, calling the move a publicity stunt, and stating, "He brings media noise, not performance." Others point to a closed-door altercation after last year's Japanese Grand Prix, where words escalated into a near-physical confrontation. One source claimed a Red Bull engineer had to step in to separate them. What started as competitive friction had mutated into outright hostility. Sources within both teams have revealed growing internal division. At Ferrari, some crew members reportedly warned Leclerc to let it go before the race, fearing he'd get baited into a fight. At Mercedes, staff were already on edge, describing Hamilton's mood as electrified. One mechanic allegedly overheard him muttering, "If he thinks I'm backing down, he's dreaming." Even the FIA isn't united. Leaks from inside the organization suggest infighting among stewards. Some are demanding a multi-race suspension. Others are urging caution, terrified of the political and financial backlash. The sport has never been this fractured, not over a crash, not over 2 drivers, not over anything. Fans have lost their minds. Social media is a war zone. Thousands of posts per minute. Hashtags like #LeclercAssault and #HamiltonMadness are trending worldwide. The comment sections are battlegrounds. People are choosing sides, drawing lines, creating memes, publishing frame-by-frame breakdowns like they're analyzing the Zapruder film. This isn't just a motorsport story, it's a global frenzy. And let's not pretend this ends here. This is the kind of rupture that shifts everything. Championships are no longer the main plot. Now it's about revenge, redemption, and raw pride. Every future overtake, every qualifying session, every glance across the paddock, it's all been infected by this moment. There's a storm coming. You can feel it in every engine rev, every glare exchanged in the paddock. This wasn't just a racing incident. It was a declaration. And the consequences will echo through every lap that follows. It didn't just break the internet. It detonated across every single digital platform like a seismic pulse ripping through the heart of the sports world. Jeddah wasn't just a Grand Prix, it became the epicenter of a cultural shockwave that shook Formula One to its very foundation. Within seconds of the collision, every corner of social media lit up like a global wildfire. People weren't just watching, they were living it. Twitch streamers interrupted their gaming sessions to break it down live. TikTokers abandoned trends to cover the chaos. Discord servers became virtual emergency response centers. Every single racing fan on Earth became an amateur analyst, a courtroom prosecutor, and a cinematic director, all rolled into one. You couldn't escape it. People were zooming into Leclerc's facial expressions frame by frame, trying to catch the exact moment rage overtook pain. Others reverse-engineered Hamilton's radio silence, speculating that his team had muted him to prevent more damage. AI bots were fed crash data to simulate what should have happened if they had braked half a second earlier. Fan pages created 3D models of the crash site. Conspiracy theorists claimed telemetry data had been altered in real time. One Twitter thread, 97 posts long, argued that it was all orchestrated to boost Drive to Survive ratings, and people believed it. In the Ferrari garage, the atmosphere was glacial. Engineers looked like they'd aged 10 years in one evening. One insider posted anonymously that Leclerc's scream from inside the medical room echoed across the paddock, a guttural, furious roar that stopped people in their tracks. It wasn't pain, the post said, it was betrayal. That same night, fans hacked into team radio archives looking for hidden messages. One unverified clip surfaced of a Mercedes strategist whispering "Don't hold back" just before the crash. It was debunked within hours, but not before it reached 12 million views. And Hamilton? He looked like a storm barely contained in human form. A rogue cameraman caught him wiping blood off the side of his helmet with his race suit sleeve. His eyes, glassy, locked, ferocious, never blinked. He passed by his team, ignored them all, and headed straight to the paddock exit. He didn't talk. He didn't acknowledge the chaos around him. He walked like a man on a mission, fists clenched, helmet strap still hanging from his arm like a forgotten weapon. Media outlets couldn't catch up. Every news anchor sounded like they were reporting from the front lines of a war zone. News tickers ran side by side with crash replays. Radio shows canceled their regular programming just to cover the aftermath. A famous presenter compared the moment to Ali versus Frazier, if they'd crashed into each other in the middle of Madison Square Garden. CNN even ran a breaking news banner that read, "F1 incident escalates to global phenomenon." Major sponsors were boiling with fury. Legal teams were activated. One luxury fashion house put all campaign materials featuring either driver under review. A senior executive from a tech company, who was set to appear in a PR shoot with Leclerc next week, reportedly canceled the event, saying, "We don't associate with unhinged behavior." Within internal circles, managers feared this was more than a publicity crisis. It was a full-blown existential threat to their brand alignment. Whispers of contract clauses. Emergency board meetings. Lawyers on standby. Liberty Media's inner circle scrambled to contain the firestorm. High-ranking officials called for a total communication lockdown. FIA representatives were reportedly summoned to a private Zoom call where tempers boiled over. One Liberty VP allegedly threatened to shut down all media access for the rest of the season if the situation kept spiraling. But it was too late. The gates were open. The drama had become uncontainable. And audiences were addicted. And then came the clip that stopped the earth spinning. Past 1 a.m., the paddock was nearly deserted. Rain had started to fall lightly, giving the asphalt a ghostly shimmer. Out of the shadows emerged Leclerc, pale, hollow-eyed, silent as stone. His race suit was half unzipped, his arms slung tight in bandages, his hair wet from sweat and saline. The camera zoomed in slowly, capturing a 1,000-yard stare that pierced through every screen it touched. He didn't say a word, didn't nod, didn't blink. His face was marble. He looked like a man who had lost something sacred. Minutes later, Hamilton surfaced, walking alone, a single overhead light casting his silhouette long and heavy against the pit wall. His steps were slow, intentional. At one point, he stopped in front of the covered Ferrari wreckage. The tarp fluttered in the breeze, exposing a sliver of red carbon fiber twisted into something barely recognizable. Hamilton didn't move for 18 seconds. No words. No gestures. Just silence. A silence that screamed louder than any interview ever could. By sunrise, the footage had transcended sports. Artists were sketching fan art. Actors were tweeting about playing them in a movie. A famous novelist called it the most cinematic real-life moment of the decade. EDM producers dropped tracks using Leclerc's radio outburst as a hook. Fans edited fake trailers for a fictional F1 movie using real footage, set to epic scores. One video titled "The Day F1 Turned into a Legend" hit 100 million views in under 10 hours. It had gone beyond racing. It had become folklore. The kind of moment that doesn't just trend, it tattoos itself into history. Hamilton and Leclerc, no longer just athletes, were now avatars of pride, pain, fury, and fire. What happened in Jeddah wasn't just an accident. It was the spark that split a generation. No sanctions. No official slap on the wrist. Just a vague gesture from race control wrapped in corporate language. Joint error, lack of clarity, exceptionally rare scenario. But beneath that sterile phrasing lay an emotional inferno. The kind that scorches more than tires. What truly unfolded was a seismic shift in the psychological landscape of two of the fiercest gladiators on the grid. Trust didn't just crack, it vaporized. And now, every lap is loaded with unspoken threats, every corner transformed into a potential detonation point. What the public saw as a procedural warning was, in reality, the detonation of a long-buried rivalry. The smiles? Forced. The handshakes? Hollow. The atmosphere? Radioactive. No one had to say a word, the entire paddock felt it. Like a storm that doesn't need thunder to announce itself. These weren't two drivers moving on. They were silently preparing for battle, internalizing every slight, replaying every frame, committing every moment to memory like a warrior studying an enemy's weaknesses before war. From the moment engines roared in Jedha, it was obvious, this wasn't motorsport anymore. It was a psychological dogfight at full throttle. The tension wasn't just visible, it was palpable. Engineers whispered behind pit walls. Team radio channels crackled with hesitation. Strategists second-guessed their own logic, afraid that one wrong pit call might ignite a nuclear incident between their own drivers. The cars were fast, yes, but the emotions behind the wheel were faster, hotter, more combustible. No fan needed subtitles to understand what was happening. One look at their body language during the national anthem, the icy stares across the garage, the silence during the debrief, it screamed louder than any post-race quote ever could. This was a powder keg. A civil war hidden beneath layers of PR gloss and corporate neutrality. And the media? They've smelled blood. Commentators are throwing veiled jabs. Former champions are hinting at internal meltdowns. Analysts are dissecting telemetry like it's ancient scripture, looking for proof of sabotage, of personal vendettas masked as racing lines. Pundits pretend to stay neutral, but their eyes light up with every tense wheel-to-wheel exchange. They want this to explode. Fans are no different. They're treating this rivalry like a religion. Twitter has turned into a battleground of hot takes and conspiracy threads. Clips are going viral within seconds. Zoomed-in freeze frames of helmet movements. Wild interpretations of brake pressure data. Every smile is a lie. Every compliment, a coded insult. Viewers don't just want overtakes anymore, they crave chaos. Betrayal. Redemption. Blood. And the drivers? They've entered a new dimension. They aren't just racing, they're manipulating, provoking, stalking each other's every move. This goes beyond defending a position or chasing purple sectors. It's psychological warfare with a carbon fiber shell. One will fake a move just to unsettle the other. One will brake late not for position, but to send a message, I'm still here and I'm not backing off. Respect is gone. Every interaction is now a test of nerve, of pride, of identity. No telemetry can measure the magnitude of this rift. No press release can contain it. Because this feud is now alive, it breathes, it festers, it evolves. And it's far from over. If anything, this is just the opening chapter in a much darker narrative. One where racing skill takes a back seat to mind games, where the title fight becomes secondary to personal vengeance. Every GP from here on is no longer a competition, it's a standoff. Every slow exit, every bold lunge, every side eye in the paddock is a chess move designed to destabilize the other. There is no reset button. No trust fall waiting to happen. These two will haunt each other through every sector, every start, every rainy qualifying session. Not for points. Not for trophies. But for dominance. For revenge. For the last word in a story that refuses to end. And make no mistake, this fire isn't cooling. It's spreading.